Welcome, fellow travelers, and it's good to have you join me on Highway Tomorrow. I'm in Ostrów, Wielkopolski, Poland, hometown of my husband, and we're going to be here for about 4 weeks, and then a couple of weeks in Germany, a week in Hanoi, and then returning to Bali. The Hanoi trip, Vietnam, is kind of because we couldn't find a flight direct home. It's complicated. Anyway, we've got about a month here. We've got a great little apartment right in the heart of town. Everything's within walking distance: the grocery stores, the gym, the bars, clubs, supermarket, cafes. It's really spectacular. It's a town of about 70,000 people, which makes it a little larger than Petaluma, California. However, it's far more compact. Like I say, being in the center of town is way more interesting than, well, I don't know if I'd say way more interesting than being in the center of Petaluma, but it's pretty cool. It's got its old world European charm. Here, let me give you a quick spin around the square. This is where I parked myself for coffee. As you can see, coming back to me. And so today I want to talk about language learning, because I am trying to conquer Polish. Probably not one of the easiest languages in the world. And a lot of people say I have a proclivity to that languages come easy to me, and therefore I think sometimes it's an excuse for not trying, quite frankly. My approach to language learning is that it takes work, you know. You're not going to be able to pick up Duolingo for 15 minutes once or twice a week and expect to have even basic communication skills down. Secondly, I think when we talk about learning a language, we need to lower our expectations. You're not going to learn a language. You're going to learn some basic communication skills after about a month of study. I think the United States Defense Department has a language learning program to where you can become fluent in something like Arabic within 3 months, but they're probably spending 8 hours a day, you know, in classroom and with cultural materials. And if you put that amount of effort into it, and that is the other point, effort that you're willing to put into it. I think if you want to learn a language, whether it's Spanish, Indonesian, even Polish, you need to commit to at least an hour a day minimum. You have to work at it. It doesn't come easy. For me, I've always enjoyed and been fascinated by languages. I studied linguistics, so I know a little bit about the structure, you know, what languages do, what the purpose is. And having studied several languages, I see the nuances and the differences. Learning a language is learning to see the world different from your own thoughts and cultures. Every language breaks up the world a little differently. I don't know of any language that has a one-on-one correspondence to another language. Certainly there are nouns and verbs that translate, but there are going to be way more nuances that are interesting. I'm always fascinated in the early stages of what I call learning to orient myself in space and time. And in the beginning, you're learning to say, you know, things about where I am, where things are. Many languages have a word for there, here, but then many languages have a word for over there. So there's here, there, near, which is near, and then there, which is far away. And of course, as we know from Romance languages, Polish included, which is not a Romance language, a lot of languages have male and female gender for nouns and verbs. Most European languages have very complicated verb declinations, past, present, future, subjunctive, blah, blah, blah. Indonesian, for example, a lot of Asian languages do not. Vietnamese does not. So you end up saying things like I eat today, I eat tomorrow, I eat yesterday. And you just use a time modifier to express your thoughts rather than an actual verb tense, a change in verb tense. As I say, I've always been fascinated by language. I started working on Polish a couple of years ago and found it daunting. Didn't think I'd get anywhere with it. When we committed to being here for a month to visit ZB's family, I decided this was the time, to really immerse myself. I used my go-to course, which is a Pimsleur course, which I prefer because it's very auditory. It's very additive. You learn simple sentences and then you start adding things to make them more complex. I know that Rosetta Stone is probably really good, but you have to sit down at a computer and work visually with it, whereas Pimsleur, I first started with it because I was learning Portuguese driving to work every morning. I have worked with a lot of Brazilian guys at FedEx, and I wanted to be able to walk in there and tell them a joke in Portuguese. And I used it for Vietnamese, same thing, driving to work. So I like the Pimsleur courses. Duolingo, a lot of the online apps I think are worthless, quite frankly. I think they suck, and that if you're really interested, I would check out Pimsleur. But nothing beats being in the country and having a private tutor. Seriously, when you're ready to learn, that's the way to go. So my background is I studied Spanish in elementary school or high school or whatever, junior high. And after, 10 years of Spanish, I couldn't say hardly anything. And growing up in Texas, now living in California, that struck me as rather pathetic. I didn't have a working knowledge of Spanish. I was down in Baja for a summer, and I hired my first tutor, and she literally, and that's another thing, a good teacher is worth their weight in gold. She literally took me to the conversational level. You basically made it clear that you don't have to make complete sentences, complete statements. We don't talk that way. We answer questions, we have broken fragments, and when you're learning a language, you can do that too. And I found it very satisfactory. I felt like my Spanish became way more fluent to the point that years later when I went to Cuba, I was actually bringing some gifts from a Cuban family in San Francisco Bay Area to a family in Havana, and my partner at the time, whose Spanish was much better than mine but did not want to deal with the family, so he kind of stood off to the side and later told me that when I was talking to the family, two of the brothers said, "He speaks Spanish like a Mexican." And Cubans are very proud of the way they speak Spanish. Snobby to the point, And later when Tim told me that, I was like, oh yes, I've worked so hard to learn Spanish, and finally, I speak like a Mexican. Yes, that's good. Which, of course, I'd spent all my time in Mexico. Of course I'm going to speak like a Mexican, and I'm proud of it. I have no problem with that. I think it's great. It doesn't have to be perfect Castilian Spanish. It's just communication. So anyway, getting back to learning a language, if you're interested. First off, like I say, if you can learn some basic communication skills, asking for directions, shopping, buying in a market, in a store, ordering a beer, being able to read the menu, that's a huge leap. And you should pat yourself on the back if you make it that far. That's pretty damn good. I have read somewhere linguistically that if you have I want to say 138 word vocabulary, that's considered a working set for being able to function in a culture and speak the language, to be able to get around. I know that recently in my studies of Vietnam, which I did before I went to Vietnam in 2019. And I had very little, I had a vocabulary of maybe 80 words. And there were probably 2 or 3 times where it was a real rewarding moment that I got to use those limited words that I knew and that limited phrases. We were just in Vietnam for 2 weeks. Again, I got a private tutor. I lucked out. Again, I luck out with teachers. I got a really good one. And I literally went to him. We had 5 days. I did every day for 5 days. And by the second day, I was able to order food in a restaurant in Vietnamese and pay the bill. It's very rewarding. Because I'm living in Bali, I intend to go to Vietnam regularly because I love it. I love going there. And so I think in terms of my learning Vietnamese is lifelong. Every time I go, I'm going to get better. In some ways, because it's between things, it feels like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, but each time I'm progressing. Same thing with Polish here. That's kind of where I'm at with this. Let's see, what else would I want to say about learning a language? You got to work at it. If you're not willing to commit to every day for at least an hour, then you're not going to learn it. It's just not going to happen. It's not that hard. It just requires dedication. Most people have the mental capacity to learn, physics, biology, but you don't learn it by picking up an app and spending 15 minutes on it every week. So that's the number one thing. If you're sitting there saying, well, I can't learn languages, I don't have an aptitude, it's just because you're fucking lazy. That's all it is. You're just not willing to do the work. And if you really wanted to, if it's something that meant something to you, you can do it. Just get busy. Because, like I say, learning a new language is not only expanding your mind, it expands your thoughts, your views of the world, and it enriches your experience in the country you're visiting. So, as I watch people around me, it's a joy to be here. And I hope in the 4 weeks that I'm here, by the time I leave, I can go into ZB's house and tell his mom and dad a dirty joke. Thank you for joining me on Highway Tomorrow.